province of Judea. This foundational myth is the source of the theory that the Jewish diaspora the world over can trace their ancestry to Palestine. Therein lies their claim to the land, and the reason why Jewish immigrants, wherever they may be, are said to be returning to their homeland when moving to Israel. Authoritative experts on Jewish history take issue with this theory, to put it plainly, not least of which being Israel Yuval, professor of Jewish history at Hebrew University. From his The Myth of the Jewish Exile from the Land of Israel, the Romans, like any victorious army, customarily took prisoners, but they did not have a policy of exiling conquered nations from their lands. According to Josephus's probably inflated figures, 1.1 million were killed in Jerusalem, and about 97,000 were captured. Many of these met their deaths in battles with animals and in circus entertainments. Others died of hunger. But otherwise, the Jews were left in place. They emigrated from the land of Israel during the first centuries of the first millennium in a slow and gradual process, and not as the result of an intentional policy on the part of the Roman and Byzantine authorities. The myth remained and was given credence when, in the 4th century, Orosius, reviewing the data found in Josephus regarding 90,000 Jews taken captive in Jerusalem, concluded that these prisoners, who, according to him, were scattered all over the world, were the founders of the Jewish diaspora in general. Tel Aviv University's Shlomo Sand further takes issue with Josephus's estimate of 97,000 captured. There was no such metropolis in the little kingdom of Judea. A cautious estimate suggests that Jerusalem at the time could have had a population of 60,000 to 70,000 inhabitants. But most problematic of all, nowhere in the abundant Roman documentation is there any mention of a deportation from Judea, nor have any traces been found of large refugee populations around the borders of Judea after the uprising, as there would have been if a mass flight had taken place. Hebrew University's Avishai Margalit's views of the supposed exile are also worthy of attention. The claim that a Palestinian Arab descended from the early Jews is no less probable than that of, say, Menachem Begin or Golda Meir. In the popular and ahistoric version of Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple is linked with the exile from the land, but a considerable part, perhaps even a majority, of the Jewish people already lived in the diaspora before the temple was destroyed. And after it was destroyed, the size of this diaspora did not increase very greatly. Most of the Jews who survived the Romans' destruction of the country remained in Palestine. It is not particularly far-fetched to conjecture that they were the ancestors of those inhabitants who accepted Islam many generations later. A conclusion echoed by Noor Masalha, formerly the director of the Center for Religion and History at St. Mary's University, now with the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. It would not be unreasonable to argue that the modern Palestinians are more likely to be the descendants of the ancient Israelites and Canaanites than Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom were European converts to Judaism. Certainly historically, in contrast to the myth of exile and return, many of the original Jewish inhabitants of ancient Palestine had remained in the country but had accepted Christianity and Islam many generations later. A view at one point held by Israel's earliest leaders, including David Ben-Gurion himself, if it can be believed. Writing in collaboration with Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, Israel's longest-serving president, the pair published a book-length study titled The Land of Israel in the Past and in the Present. Speaking of the Palestinian farmers, or fellahin, the fellahin are not descendants of the Arab conquerors, who captured the land of Israel and Syria in the 7th century CE. The Arab victors did not destroy the agricultural population they found in the country. They expelled only the alien Byzantine rulers and did not touch the local population, nor did the Arabs go in for settlement. Even in their former habitations, the Arabians did not engage in farming. They did not seek new lands on which to settle their peasantry, which hardly existed. Their whole interest in the new countries was political, religious, and material, to rule, to propagate Islam, and to collect taxes. Further, despite the repression and suffering, the rural population remained unchanged. Indeed, the erasure of history regarding the myriad kingdoms, namely Himyarite, Khazaria, and Adiabene, whose rulers converted to Judaism, was essential to the Zionist project from the very beginning. I would be remiss not to observe how this notion of the global Jewish community as a single ethnicity resembles the darkest days of European nationalist thinking. Daniel Goldhagen's ultra-famous Hitler's Willing Executioners notably addressed European and especially German anti-Semitism head-on in the book's first chapters. Notions of Jews being a nation were bandied about in the anti-Semitic literature. The definition of the Jews that was to emerge in the second half of the 19th century from the confusing fray of conceptualizations, namely that the Jews were a race, were given voice already in the first half of the 19th century. If the claim to the so-called Holy Land isn't a religious one, as the secular Zionist movement and its progenitors claim, then the alleged historic claim lies firmly with the idea of an ethno-nationalist claim via blood and soil. The claim, as we've seen, is predicated on an array of falsehoods used to justify the violent dispossession of the land of Palestine, the word used continuously for the land for thousands of years. First documented in the late Bronze Age, about 3,200 years ago, the name Palestine is the conventional name used between 450 BC and 1948 AD to describe a geographic region between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River and various adjoining lands. The name Palestine was widely used by the most important ancient Greek historians, cartographers, writers, philosophers, and scientists, including Herodotus, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. The Greco-Roman Byzantine name Palestine is commonly found in major classical Greek texts, especially the histories of Herodotus, written near the mid-5th century BC. Further, Palestine existed as a distinct administrative unit and a formal province for over a millennium, beginning in the 2nd century Common Era with the Roman province of Syria Palestina. Emperor Hadrian chose the 1,000-year-old name Philistia, the most common geopolitical designation for Palestine used by Greek geographers and historians, long before the Old Testament stories were put together. With the advent of the Byzantine Empire, Palestine was separated into 3 provinces, Palestina Prima, Secunda, and Salutaris. Moreover, these 3 provinces were effectively governed politically, militarily, and religiously from Palestina Prima as a 3-in-1 polity from the 4th century until the early 7th century, as was Iraq, under British rule following the First World War, through the 3 provinces of Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul. As the Rashidun Caliphate began their rule in the 7th century, the name remained as the province of Jund Filastin for 4.5 centuries before being interrupted by the Crusades. With the Crusaders defeated by the Mamluks, the name was revived where it was the land of Filastin throughout the Middle Ages and well into the 20th century. To provide you a woefully incomplete timeline, a map containing Palestine by the cartographer Muhammad al-Idrisi exists circa 1154. We have additionally a map of Palestina from 1320 by Marino Sanudo. Jumping ahead to 1450, Fra Mauro completes the most detailed map in the world up to that point, showing Palestina. The map of Palestina Moderna et Terra Sancta is published in 1480. Jumping further to the 18th century for Palestina ex Monumentis Veteris Illustrate, published in 1714. In the next century, 1803, we see the Ottoman Jazid Adlas Tarjumesa. In the 15th century Mamluk literature, Mujir al-Din al-Ulaymi refers 22 times to Philistine in his glorious history of Al-Quds and Al-Khalil. By the 18th century, we can see that Palestine as a distinct country was common perception in Europe. In 1747, Thomas Salmon describes Palestine for the Modern Gazetteer of London. And the ubiquitousness of the name Palestine to describe the region is apparent certainly in the 19th century, as these titles show. Of course, Queen Victoria sponsored the Palestine Exploration Fund to explore biblical locations and obtain a foothold in the strategic location. The turn of the Victorian era coincided roughly with the descent into European nationalist conflict, which culminated in the First World War, after which the League of Nations universally accepted the name Palestine for the region now under British control. And so the British military governor Sir Ronald Storrs established the Palestine Archaeological Museum. The British Mandatory Government of Palestine produced Palestine passports, currency including the Palestine pound, and postage stamps. The colonial police force was named the Palestine Police Force. The government-owned railway company would be Palestine Railways, as well as the Palestine Sport Federation and Broadcasting Service. It wasn't just the British, of course, but also the First Zionist Congress, with their Basel program calling for the establishment of a publicly and legally secured home in Palestine for the Jewish people back in 1897. The Zionist settlers established the Jewish Agency for Palestine, the Palestine Post, the Palestine Office, the Palestine Orchestra, the Anglo-Palestine Bank, the Palestine Electric Company, the Palestine Water Company, the Palestine Mortgage and Credit Bank, Automobile Corporation. Of course, later on, a systematic renaming of the destroyed villages, a result of the Nakba, or catastrophe of 1947 to 1949, entailed the renaming of place names, often arbitrarily, using a revived modern Hebrew language. Indeed, a 1956 committee report of the official Government Names Committee, set up in 1949 by Ben-Gurion, to rename Palestinian towns, states that a decisive majority of the names were determined by mimicking the sounds of the Arabic words, a partial or complete mimicking, in order to give the new name a Hebrew character, following the accepted grammatical and voweling rules. Said longtime Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these villages, and I do not blame you, because geography books no longer exist. Not only the books do not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. There is not a single place built in this country that didn't have a former Arab population. Detractors of Palestinian history, who apparently totally dominate the Western narrative of the region's history, will challenge the legitimacy of the Palestinians' indigenousness to the land by claiming that there was no sovereign kingdom of Palestine before 1948, or that there was no such thing as a Palestinian, a claim made famous by Prime Minister Golda Meir, birth name Mabovich, an immigrant from Ukraine. But not all states, it seems, are held to this standard. After all, the term Ukraine was apparently first recorded in the year 1187, or 16 centuries after Herodotus's histories. Additionally, the use of the term Ukrainian, according to the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University, was a term of relative obscurity as late as the 19th century. Ukraine, at various points in its history, enjoyed only brief and fleeting periods of relative autonomy, though under the thumb of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and especially Russia. Though in the Western world, the sovereignty of Ukraine is very much not in question. Their claim to nationhood and their right to live free of foreign domination and destruction are seldom challenged. The reality is a grim one, that a modern European ethno-nationalist ideology utilized religious mythology and symbolism unfounded by the actual historical record. The shift from a deeply unpopular fringe group to a powerful entity with the backing of the British Empire culminated in the bloodshed that erased hundreds of whole towns, literally wiping them off the map, and depopulating the area of the new state of Israel of some 750,000 people. More were to come in subsequent bloodbaths. That the religious and furthermore empirical justification of this slow ethnic cleansing and ongoing genocide of the indigenous people, the Palestinians, is fraudulent is one of history's most cruel insults. Regular viewers of my work will know that recently I've been hard at work producing a series on the Israel lobby. This volume you're watching now is the first of a series on Zionism. The Nakba and all its horrors will be the subject of the next one, and it will be my most important video yet, by far.